Golden State Media Concepts Sci-Fi Podcast. Together we dive into the world of sci-fi and science fiction. From episodes of Star Trek, Star Wars, to The Walking Dead, Resident Evil, all the hot new science fiction movies from the backdoors of Marvel or DC. The Golden State Media Concepts Sci-Fi Podcast. You'll never look at science fiction the same way again.
Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC Sci-Fi Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Alex. Today, we're going to talk about The Boys Season 1, Episode 4. I really enjoyed this episode. It's a lot of character development in this one. So, we start out getting to know more about who Butcher is as a person. We get to know him a little bit more in depth just by watching him and his normal daily routine. So we get a flashback to an old flame who he appears to be hung up on in what are happier days. His home has actual curtains and furniture and everything instead of just his bed and the little table that he's using with a folding chair to eat breakfast at. And he also had a dog and so on and so forth. He appears to have had a very loving relationship with this person, and they seem to be a long-term partner. But as the flashback kind of ends, Butcher wakes up, and we see him get up and go take a shower and start his morning. After a shower, he goes and eats a Hot Pocket with a fork and a knife. So that was something very interesting that was, I suppose, a deliberate choice about Butcher, but I'm not sure if it's supposed to really be any more significant than like when Samantha Carter selected blue Jell-O on Stargate, just because Amanda Tapping thought it would be a quirky choice, and then it just stuck after that. So perhaps this is just one of those small choices about what makes up their character, and it's not going to go any further than, hey, sometimes Butcher, who literally butchers people, just eats Hot Pockets with a knife and fork. He is otherwise fairly neat, I suppose, when he is not wallowing in misery or murdering people. So, he is sitting there eating this Hot Pocket with a knife and fork as he watches a CCTV video of this woman from 2012. And he watches her just sit on a park bench for a while, and then she gets up and slowly walks away, and she seems very sad about it. And it is the woman from the flashback or the dream. So it's very sad, and it doesn't even come across as creepy, just like this man is heartbroken in a way and still very fixated on this person who was clearly very important to him mutually at some point and is still important to him now. So he does this first thing in the morning and then pays a visit to Susan, the deputy director of the CIA, to show her the photos of Soups using Compound V and to try to get her on board. So he brings up a really valid point in this process. He asks Susan how they would even go about trying someone like Homelander for war crimes at The Hague if any of the Soups should go rogue, as they couldn't really do anything about it if they joined the military. He uses Homelander as an example, and he says we wouldn't even be able to restrain him, and he could kill like 1,000 of us before we could even react in any way. So how would that even have checks and balances against it? There aren't any. And it's a really good point. And it's something that we've seen in The Watchmen as well. Like when the comedian and Dr. Manhattan are fighting in Vietnam, and the comedian just straight up murders a pregnant woman in a bar in Vietnam because he has impregnated her with his child, and she wants to be able to go back to the States and make sure that the child is taken care of as well. But he just goes ahead and kills her. And there's nothing anyone else can do about it because the other soups aren't doing anything about it either. And indeed, much like Homelander, the comedian in many ways is also bullying some of the other soups. Granted, not Dr. Manhattan, but Dr. Manhattan is so ambivalent that he doesn't really give a crap about what the comedian is doing. It's not even really registering for him because he is beyond space and time, pretty much. Also, as far as everyone seems to know in this show, Homelander doesn't have any weaknesses. He is very much like Superman in many ways, but unlike Superman, he doesn't appear to have a kryptonite issue. So there's not even a way to perhaps weaken him with red kryptonite. There is nothing that they could do to try him for war crimes or crimes against humanity or for genocide, which are the three main categories of crimes tried in the International Court at The Hague. It's a very logical argument that he is making this time. It's not just, I hate Homelander. It's, hey, let's think about this practically. Do you really want to give them access to the military and blanket access to military weapons and intelligence and everything across the world? This is a corporation that you were talking about handing over military control to. This is kind of insane, and we should not be doing this. So we see kind of a parallel here as well to some of the plot lines in the Marvel universe, like the Superhero Registration Act. No one is asking for them to be registered in this episode or anything like that, but we are seeing someone, in this case Butcher, go, hey, if we did that, what would be the outcome? So this is somewhere, again, between Watchmen and the Marvel universe right now. It's definitely a philosophical problem, and Susan sees right through Butcher, of course. She's like, oh yeah, you're a really great citizen. And he's like, hey, I'm really just a concerned citizen. And she knows that he is full of crap because they have had an intimate relationship in the past as well. So she's not taking his crap, and he tells her, this is why it didn't work out between us. You can't have two alpha males in the same relationship. And that made me laugh pretty hard because Susan is absolutely alpha. She's not taking any of his crap. He flippantly makes a snippy little remark to her when she asks him if he understands her conditions for helping him out with this. And she stares him down and goes, do you understand me? And he's like, yes, okay, fine. Pretty much. So he's pretty hardcore about this. And as he leaves, he calls Popclaw to blackmail her some more into giving him more info about the Compound V. But she really doesn't seem to have any more information. She just knows that when A-Train runs Compound V, he comes back with noodles from a specific restaurant in town. So we find out that Butcher and the rest of the boys have been sitting there watching the building for days and have not seen A-Train at all. They've not seen any evidence of anyone passing Compound V. And she's panicking because he's telling her that he's going to release the video footage they have of her crushing the landlord to death if she doesn't give them any more. And he's like, I'll be calling you back. And then he hangs up on her. She looks visibly distressed by this, but there's nothing else that she can do. She doesn't even know their names. They just came in while she was in shock from accidentally killing this guy and solved her problem and asked her for some information. So as far as she is concerned, she has no other recourse at this point other than to do her best to comply. We're going to go on a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to pick up with the boys sitting outside of this noodle restaurant and see how their surveillance is going. Stay tuned. You really can't underestimate the importance of having the right creative work for your brand or your product. Whether it's a logo, a website, a book cover, or an ad campaign, you really need a quality design to make that big difference pop and deliver your overall engagement and success in a competitive market. That's where Design Crowd comes in. Design Crowd has over 750,000 designers from Sydney to San Francisco ready to help you with awesome creative ideas. They make crowdsourcing work for you. So if you need a logo or you're working on your creative branding, you can go to designcrowd.com and post a brief describing the design you need. And then within about 2 to 7 days, you'll receive up to over 100 different designs from designers around the world. Then you pick the best design and approve payment to the designer. So you're only paying for the design that you want. It takes a lot of the guesswork out of freelancing and out of crowdsourcing. And you don't have to be a huge company like Harvard Business School to use Design Crowd, although they have used it as well. You can start a project on Design Crowd for as little as $99. And if you go right now to designcrowd.com/health and wellness or enter the promo code health and wellness on their website, then our health and wellness listeners will receive up to $150 off of your design project. That's designcrowd.com/health and wellness or entering that promo code health and wellness.
Want to find out what movies to go see? Then check out the GSMC Movie Podcast. It's your ticket to the latest movies, whether it's a new blockbuster event, romantic, comedy, or action flick. This show has got it all covered. They talk some what to go see now. Don't bother. What's hot on Netflix and everything in between. That's gsmcpodcast.com/movie-podcast. When it's all about the movies, it has to be this new show. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit gsmcpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back. Before the break, we were starting out with getting to know Butcher better as a person as we watch him go about his morning routine and then pay a visit to Susan, followed by calling Popclaw to blackmail her into more information about Compound V. Now we're going to pick up with where the rest of the boys are. So while Butcher is hanging out around town and doing these terrible chores, Mother's Milk and Frenchie are sitting in a van with Huey, and Mother's Milk gets a phone call from his wife, and he lies to her about being at work and breaking up fights in the yard at juvie, while he's actually sitting there in the van with the other boys. So he hangs up, and Frenchie clearly has something to say, and he quotes Jean-Paul Sartre at him, saying that marriage stifles our essential male urges. So they clearly have a difference of opinion about partnerships. And MM is like, sure, he may have said that, but he also died alone and lonely, and his woman was cheating on him, while Frenchie maintains that he and his lady had an open relationship and were free to explore other things with other people. And MM says, like, what? Gonorrhea? So clearly they have two very different opinions about what partnership and affection and sex should look like and what life in general looks like. And Mother's Milk is very clearly very attached to his wife. And he's like, what is even the point in living and making a life if you don't have someone to come home to? Whereas Frenchie says that he comes home and goes to bed with someone new every night. So they just have to agree to disagree at this point, because we finally get to see a drug pickup via someone shoulder checking a guy carrying a paper bag and dropping his own paper bag when he does this. But then the man who was walking the other direction and who got shoulder checked picks up the second bag that looks identical to the one that he's carrying that ostensibly has noodles in it, and continues walking. So the boys, even though they're sitting there bantering and talking about differences in personal life philosophy, they do catch this, and they follow the guy into the back of a store. Huey is not super keen to go back in there, and Frenchie tells him not to be scared and calls him Little Huey in French. At which point, Huey asks him to stop calling him that and says, "I'm 6 feet tall." So this is actually an important moment for Huey. So it's a development moment, because even though it's very small, it's a marker of Huey standing up for himself, even in a small way. And it's something that can be viewed as potentially being antagonistic. He's putting himself in a position to go up against Frenchie. But Frenchie seems more amused than anything else and is like, okay. I mean, he doesn't say anything, but you get the sense that he may well respect that, and Huey asserting his boundaries as well. So I think that it's a really great little moment of showing where Huey is on his journey at this time in the plot. So he's still not keen on going and doing these heroic things, but he's kind of coming into his own a little bit. And while they're looking for the compound V in the basement of the back of the store, they come across a girl in a cage. And it's not exactly a cage. It looks like it's like a prison door almost. But she's sitting in the floor watching TV. And while she's in there watching TV, we see that there are some armed guards in the other room. I use the term guards loosely. It's clear that they're supposed to be guarding her, but we don't know exactly why. And it doesn't matter initially for us anyway, because they're eating lunch, because the other bag did in fact contain noodles. So they find that they have set the compound V down and they've really found it. And as Mother's Milk is going to go ahead and grab the compound V and keep them on mission, Frenchie is distracted by this girl, and he is like, "I think we should let her out. She looks like she wants to be let out." And MM is like, "Hey, stay on the mission. You don't need to deviate." And we know from their previous interaction when they first got together again that Mother's Milk, is upset with Frenchie because of something that happened when he went off mission, and something happened to someone named Mallory. So that's all we know up to this point, but you can see MM really bristling and being like, "Hey, dude, stay on the mission." But Frenchie goes ahead and lets her out anyway. And she immediately kills her armed captors. They run in there with their firearms, yelling not to let her out. And she goes straight for them with a rage. And we see that even though this is a small woman, she is easily able to kill these men who are armed as well with her bare hands. Like Beast style from X-Men, you guys, before she turns on the boys. She is in fact so scary that one of the men who was guarding her chooses to instead shoot himself in the head rather than letting her kill him by punching and gouging through his abdomen and his eyes and everything, as she has done to the others. She's very small, but it's very gory, and she's clearly very strong. And as soon as she realizes she has gotten all of her captors, she does turn on them. And they make it into the cage or the little jail area she was locked in just before she gets them. And she tries to get them through the bars, but she can't. So she recognizes that and leaves without saying a word this entire time. You can tell that MM is not going to be happy after this outcome either, as they all almost died and the mission definitely went sideways. Not only were they not able to get the Compound V, and now there are a bunch of dead bodies and a girl on the loose, but now they also are locked in a cage. But we now find ourselves in another scene. So we see that the Deep is in therapy. He's talking to his therapist about how he recently got drunk at a Super Bowl party with the Seven and tried to talk to the guys about dolphins. And he specifically says the guys, although I can completely understand why Queen Maeve would not want to hang out with them, and this may be pre-Annie as well. But he said he tried to talk to them about dolphins, and he seems very passionate about dolphins, and clearly wants to protect them. He genuinely seems to care about dolphins, even if he is someone who routinely sexually assaults women. So, back to Santa Clarita Diet, people can be more than one thing, Joel. It's almost a direct parallel in many ways. So, he is sitting there talking to the therapist and is clearly feeling ridiculed, saying that he was honest with the guys about wanting to protect the dolphins and about how cool dolphins are, but that night A-Train put a blow-up dolphin in his bed with lipstick on. And so he's having kind of a personal crisis. He's having some imposter syndrome and says he considers himself to be a diversity hire because he's able to talk to animals and has gills and everything, but that he doesn't think he's actually valued because they don't tap him for anything that's not directly having to do with water, even though he's also super strong like the others. So his therapist is having this conversation with him, and he's like, well, who are you? And he goes, I'm one of the Seven. And he asks him what that means, and he says that means he can do anything he sets his mind to. At which point the therapist asks, and what do you want to do? And we don't get his answer, but it isn't actually as ominous as it could have been given earlier events in the series. It seems that he's just very passionate about wildlife, and so perhaps that is where he's going next. We're going to go on a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about how the boys get out of the cage and what's going on with the Compound V. Stay tuned. You really can't underestimate the importance of having the right creative work for your brand or your product. Whether it's a logo, a website, a book cover, or an ad campaign, you really need a quality design to make that big difference pop and deliver your overall engagement and success in a competitive market. That's where Design Crowd comes in. Design Crowd has over 750,000 designers from Sydney to San Francisco ready to help you with awesome creative ideas. They make crowdsourcing work for you. So if you need a logo or you're working on your creative branding, you can go to designcrowd.com and post a brief describing the design you need. And then within about 2 to 7 days, you'll receive up to over 100 different designs from designers around the world. Then you pick the best design and approve payment to the designer. So you're only paying for the design that you want. It takes a lot of the guesswork out of freelancing and out of crowdsourcing. And you don't have to be a huge company like Harvard Business School to use Design Crowd, although they have used it as well. You can start a project on Design Crowd for as little as $99. And if you go right now to designcrowd.com/health and wellness or enter the promo code health and wellness on their website, then our health and wellness listeners will receive up to $150 off of your design project. That's designcrowd.com/health and wellness or entering that promo code health and wellness.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back. Before the break, we were talking about the Deep going to therapy and how Frenchie going off mission has again jeopardized the mission and resulted in them being locked in a cage. So as we pick up here, Butcher has arrived in this basement to unlock the boys and check out their find of Compound V. So as they're examining this area, they're kind of taking their time because, hey, all of the people who were guarding it are dead now. They find that the girl who has escaped was being injected with Compound V, even though she's an adult. So this grown woman was injected with Compound V, and they're not sure why they were keeping her locked up and injecting her. But they find that that's a problem, and they might want to find her. But first, MM and Frenchie are going to get in another argument about Frenchie going off mission. It's very heated and passionate, and this issue is one that keeps arising between the two of them. They seem to have latent animosity the rest of the time that mostly comes across in giving each other a hard time. But when it really comes down to it and the crap hits the fan, you can see how deeply MM is affected by this and how Frenchie still has a really good heart deep down, even if he's willing to do a lot of these terrible things. Because again, people can be more than one thing, Joel. So Butcher finally cuts them off and is essentially telling them to chill because the Soups and Vought are going to have people looking for her and they need to find her before they do. And also, they should probably get out of there in case somebody comes to check out that area. Since A-Train is also known to run these goods, it might be a good idea for them to get out of the area. As they're about to leave, Huey gets a message from Annie, Starlight, and Butcher tells him that he has to go on a date with her because Butcher wants him to bug her phone. And Huey's really uncomfortable with that and really says, she's not a bad person. But Butcher underlines for us where he stands by just saying that she's a Soup just like the rest of them. So the fact of her being who she is as a person down to ostensibly her genetics is enough for Butcher to decry her as being problematic and perhaps even evil in his eyes. It seems like this is perhaps something that may become a source of contention between them. And Butcher is really the person who has prompted Huey's hero's journey in a way. Sure, it was initially about Robin, but Robin was not enough for Huey to seek retribution. It was enough to make him really upset and depressed and to want to think about whether or not he wanted to take that money and sign the NDA. But he was still in the depths of his grief initially. Butcher has come in and given him a sense of purpose and helped usher him into this adult world, really. Sure, Huey had a job before and he had a partner, but he wasn't really being his full self. So Butcher for him is almost a father figure in a way. He's a mediator for Huey emerging into full-fledged manhood and for coming through on his hero's journey. So for him to try to say anything really to Butcher to kind of fight him on this, it's kind of a lot. So Huey cares about Annie very clearly, and he's not happy with where this is going. But ultimately, Huey's going to do what Butcher instructs him to do, because that is where he is in his personal journey as a man and as a hero, more or less. Butcher, however, is also displaying some types of xenophobia that remind me a lot of Jack O'Neill in Stargate SG-1. It's the same types of xenophobia and racism that I've often seen displayed in stories about individuals who have come back from war, and they refer to the opposition in the war by derogatory terms, and also in absolute blanket generalizations, as though there is no variation in the other side just by virtue of it being an us versus them. Jack does this in Stargate by referring to the Goa'uld as snakeheads, and he does not even like the Tok'ra. So the Goa'uld and the Tok'ra are essentially the same for Jack. He doesn't even care that the Tok'ra only take willing hosts, and he would rather die than take a Tok'ra into his body to literally save his life, except for the fact that Sam asks him to do it for her. So it's very interesting to me how Jack develops throughout that story. One of his best friends has a Goa'uld in his abdomen because Teal'c is a Jaffa, and also he likes Sam's dad. He really likes Jacob a lot, and he even is pretty alright with Selmak. So for him, though, it's an exception, not the rule. But for Butcher, he's not gotten to that point yet. For him, all soups are evil, and he wants to find the woman who was injected with Compound V, and he also wants Huey to bug Annie's phone, because to him, they are all soups, and therefore they are all evil. I'm interested to see how Butcher progresses in this belief as the story goes along, as Jack O'Neill also started out incredibly gruff because of loss and eventually came to accept that there are some exceptions to all rules, including Teal'c being a Jaffa who was on their side, and Sam and Daniel not being all that bad as geeks, and Selmak / Jacob being a really good guy who consistently had their backs. It's really establishing our baseline for who Butcher is right now. Even as we are watching Huey grow, Butcher is staying firmly very much who he is. Stillwell and the marketing guys, however, are also having a meeting right now, debating what to say to the public about Translucent, because he has not been seen, but by the public for a little bit. So they decide finally to say that he's fighting MS-13 and that he is away on a mission and will be dedicated to fighting MS-13 for an unknown amount of time. But mid-meeting, Stillwell gets a call that Transoceanic Flight 37 from Paris to Chicago was hijacked by what they believe to be 3 terrorists, and that the military has sent out F-16s. So she calls for Homelander and Queen Maeve to immediately go ahead and fly off to try to stop them. So the military is already handling it, but Stillwell really wants them to be able to get that military contract. She's way high up the food chain at Vought, and this could be a huge win for her and for Vought in general, but also just a lot of money for her too. So she wants them to go and try to save this plane, because if they can save a plane over international waters from being hijacked by terrorists, then it can help cement their goal of getting the 7 into a military contract, without technically operating on foreign soil and violating any types of international law. They're really using this opportunity to put the congressman between a rock and a hard place. And that's exactly what they're doing, as they're using tragedy as an opportunity. We're going to go on a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to pick up with Frenchie, A-Train, and Stillwell. Stay tuned.
Watching TV has changed over time. Streaming has become the new norm. That's why Golden State Media Concepts television podcast dives headfirst to the world of cord cutting. Want to be on the loop of what's hot in Netflix? Or if it's not a preference, what about original shows in Hulu? We've got you covered. Join us as we fill in the blank and talk about movies to stream and what show you should be binging. This is the Golden State Media Concepts television podcast.
Welcome back. Before the break, we were talking about Stillwell's instructions for Homelander and Queen Maeve to take a terrorist hijacking as an opportunity to save some folks publicly and influence the congressman into having to go ahead and accept soups in the military due to PR and political pressure. We were also talking about the differences between Huey and Butcher and where they are in their personal journeys. Now we're going to pick up with where Frenchie and the others are. Frenchie and the boys are trying to track down the woman they released from the cage, and we see Frenchie meeting up with his old lady. I'm not sure what else to call her, as Frenchie has said that he likes to go to sleep with someone else every night. So I'm not sure if this is his paramour. She seems to be a paramour in a way. And he seems to have maybe an open relationship with her the way that he was referring to Jean-Paul Sartre earlier as well. But she also seems kind of scary in a way. We don't get to know much about her, but she's there to give him some material that he needs to go hunt down that missing girl that he released. But she lets him know that she got a place and she wants to know when he's going to be by. So she seems pretty scary and intimidating, in fact, but Frenchie goes ahead and leaves with the materials, and we catch up to see A-Train going to the noodle place and seeing bodies being taken out by medico-legal personnel. So he is now in a panic because he was just going over there to probably do a regular run of drugs of the Compound V, only to find that everyone he was supposed to deal with is dead somehow. So he knows this is bad news bears. And we jump to Stillwell, who is trying to get an update over the phone on Flight 37 when the Deep shows up to talk to her. So this is following his therapy session, and he shows up and wanting to talk to her and is really insistent on it. She's clearly not in a good mood, but he's clearly used to just mostly getting whatever he wants. And so he doesn't understand the importance of waiting on the appropriate timing to talk to who is effectively your boss about something, how to just wait it out and then go and talk to them. He instead just plows deep into it and interrupts her, tells her he wants to discuss it right now anyway. And he says that he wants to go on a mission to Ocean Land to save the dolphins. He says that the dolphins there are underfed and abused, and the dolphins have told him that they're frustrated, and he wants to go public with it. But the problem is he's the face of Ocean Land right now, so that is a PR nightmare for them. And he's supposed to be the face of their fall campaign. So he tells Stillwell, hey, let's just cancel it. Let's just bail on that deal. Who cares about it? He actually doesn't care about the money in this case. He thinks that it's going to be such a slam dunk that he doesn't even expect her to really tell him no, seemingly. So he's like, yeah, let's just bail on it. It doesn't matter. She's like, no, we can't bail on it. But she's dismissively insisting that they can't do it. She's not even giving any thought to the treatment of the dolphins or where he's coming from or what he's actually saying. She just knows that he's going against the marketing rules because she's looking at this like a business rather than as a group that saves other lives. So she ushers him out the door, and as she does so, she tells him to play to his strengths and then slams the door in his face. So this is really rough for the Deep because we know he's having some imposter syndrome issues right now. And it's not that I'm sympathetic towards him per se, but this is another facet of his character. And having these multifaceted characters is what makes them more interesting. The comedian is interesting as an anti-hero, really, in The Watchmen because he is both good and bad in many different ways. He's very gray in that area. I mean, he's really not even gray because the black and white doesn't mix together for the comedian. He's more like Rorschach in that way. There are parts of him that are totally bad. There are parts of him that are just complex in a way. I feel like he's more of a strange mosaic, whereas for Rorschach, it's just black and white. That's what makes Gary so interesting in Santa Clarita Diet, because he is more than one thing. Now, they have to go through some terrible things to allow us to see them in these other perspectives, but it makes them well-rounded as characters. And I do want to draw that distinction. I'm not saying that they are good people. I am saying that they are interesting as characters. Katniss not wanting to be the face of the Hunger Games, her not wanting to be the Mockingjay is part of what makes it so interesting that she is. She's not just barreling headlong into this. This is something that she is very reluctantly doing. Huey is reluctantly being a part of this too. So it can go either way. It doesn't have to be just all mostly bad people. It doesn't have to be only characters who are also guilty of sexual assault. You can have other characters whose hearts are otherwise pure, like Huey, but who do bad things. Technically, kind of, sort of, maybe. Is murdering Translucent really, truly terrible? I don't know, and neither does Huey. That's something he is still trying to figure out. But it's part of what makes him so compelling. And I really like that about this show, that we're seeing that there is, or was at least, a softer side to Butcher, and that may be just as capable of killing as the rest of them, but he truly, deeply loves his wife. Like, he is head over heels for his wife. And Frenchie, we're learning, is a killer as well, but Frenchie also seems to have some sort of connection with this new woman who is out running around killing people, possibly. And who knows what her story is at this point. This entire show is very much people can be more than one thing, Joel. They really stretch it in many different directions, and I enjoy seeing how they are adapting that. So after Stillwell really slams the door in the Deep's face and tells him to just essentially not go chasing waterfalls and stick to the rivers and the lakes that he's used to, we pop on over to A-Train confronting Popclaw about the Compound V. So he's come directly from the place where the woman escaped from the basement, and he grills Popclaw as to who she told, but she vehemently denies telling anyone at all. And he tells her that regardless, she has to pack a bag because he has to hide her from Homelander before Homelander finds out. Then we see the unnamed woman who has escaped find some woman who she apparently knows, as that woman recognizes her, even though no words are spoken by the unnamed woman. She finds her, though, in the back of a nail parlor and violently kills her. before just walking out. And then we get to see Huey and Annie go on a date at the bowling alley. It's very adorable, and they talk about their first kisses, and we find out that Annie was kind of a late bloomer who had a very Christian upbringing. So she didn't have her first kiss until she was in high school, in fact, at her senior prom. And Huey just poorly segues into asking her about Translucent. He's dealing with a lot of guilt from having recently killed him, and is shocked, kind of horrified really, to find out that Translucent actually has a young son who's about 8 to 10 years old. That's really not great for Huey's crisis of conscience that he seems to be constantly undergoing. But we also see Queen Maeve and Homelander arrive at the plane and start handling the 3 terrorists. One flies out the airlock, one gets his neck snapped by Maeve, and one gets precision zapped by Homelander's eyes. But there's an additional terrorist in the cockpit, and he's holding a gun to the pilot's head, with the co-pilot already dead. So they try to get him to not kill the captain of the plane, but unfortunately, he goes ahead and kills him. So Homelander zaps him across the neck, effectively cutting off his head, and also zaps the console behind him, dooming the plane. And Maeve's like, crap, what do we do now? And Homelander thinks about it for about 4 seconds before deciding to just abandon them all. We're going to go on a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to pick up with what this means for Maeve and Homelander. Stay tuned.
The GSMC Life and Happiness Podcast takes you on a journey of exploration. We'll discuss tried and true methods alongside the latest trends of how to best live your life to its fullest and happiest. From psychology to meditation, science to self-help books, the GSMC Life and Happiness Podcast will help you to discover what makes you happy and how you can live life being the best you possible. Download the GSMC Life and Happiness Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back. Before the break, we were discussing how Huey and Annie are on a date, where the rest of our characters are so far, and that Queen Maeve and Homelander have gotten to the hijacked plane only to disable the pilot's console and not be able to land it in any way. So this ends up being a really important moment for Queen Maeve. She seems to be like a stereotypical Ice Queen character a lot of the time, but you can tell that there is a lot that goes on with Maeve that remains unsaid. And she really does care about people, though, deep down. We've seen Homelander call all of the audience MFers under his breath, but Maeve really seems to care about these people. She seems really upset by this concept, and she follows him out of the cockpit and is telling him, hey, we need to do something. And all around them, people are shouting and everything. And he's saying, you know, like, what are we going to do? And she says, hold up the plane. And he's like, what am I going to brace on? There's nothing below us. There's nothing to stand on. And she's like, well, then try to fly at it to counteract the velocity. And he says that at that speed, he'd either punch a hole through the plane or the plane would start tumbling tail over head. And so she's saying, well, what about doing it one at a time? Take them down to the planet one at a time. And he's like, are you serious? Like 123 times? There's 123 people here. I can't do all that before this plane crashes. There's no way. So Maeve really pleads with him. She literally pleads with him to do something or anything. But he just calmly walks to the back of the plane, lying to everyone along the way that he's going to save them. And I don't necessarily disagree with him philosophically for lying that he's going to save them. It's better in some ways maybe if he die believing that they're going to be saved, rather than being frightened out of their minds for the last few minutes of their lives. I don't think he does it out of the goodness of his heart, though. Let's not go that far. He's definitely not doing that. He's just trying to get to the back of the plane to leave without having to deal with most of them. Maeve legit has tears in her eyes at this point and is desperately trying to get him to save even just this woman and her daughter, but he refuses, and his reasoning is that if they do, it'll be bad PR because everyone will know that they left the others to die. And that really brings Butcher's point back around that the only thing the Supes care about is protecting their reputations. That's really underlining it. But we see here that while he is absolutely right about Homelander and Popclaw, he's not right about Maeve, because she almost just stays there with those people. And he's like, you can stay here with them and die, or you can come with me. And she just stands there with him, and then he takes her outside flying, and they just watch the plane crash, and she's very upset, but not saying anything else at this point. So now we have the boys checking out the crime scene where the unnamed woman went, and A-Train's there, but from A-Train's presence and the missing blue nail polish, they determined that she was there, because that was the other thing that she had in her cell. She had a TV and a little bed, and she also had blue nail polish. So Frenchie says he thinks that she's working her way backwards to figure out where she came from so she can figure out how to make her way back home. We go back to Annie and Huey, and they're still bowling and talking about how nice Annie is, because there's an ad for Samaritan's Embrace and a Christian convention she's going to be at with Supes like Ezekiel. And she's going to make an appearance at it to do a panel for teens, but she's donating the money she gets for her appearance to a place called Covenant House. And Huey's like, wow, you're really the nicest person in this city. But he calls her out on being a better bowler than she's letting on. And she's like, well, I learned a long time ago, don't show men like your strength, because they're going to hold it against you. And so that's why she's kind of been holding back, but she does show him that she can kick his butt at bowling, and she's actually really good at it. So we pop back to Frenchie and the boys looking for the unnamed woman in the station, and Frenchie hears the show that she was watching in her cell and finds her in this tech store. He seems to have a really good knack for finding her, and I'm not sure if he's good at tracking everyone or just this individual. But he tracks her down to the store and talks to her where she's hiding under the table. And we learn that part of the reason why Frenchie has this softness to him, but also the hardness, is that he was abducted by his father when he was a child, and his father would put out cigarettes on his skin. And no matter how much Frenchie tried to run away and get back to his mom via train or bus stations, his dad always found him. And he seems to find this woman to be a kindred spirit, and he chooses not to gas her with the canister he has. But unfortunately, the moment is broken as he's trying to get her to come out from under the table and come with him by someone changing the channel on the television. And when she hears the sound change, she flips the table on him before running out of the store and disappearing, which leaves MM really mad because they are yet again off mission. So it's not great right now. It's kind of bad news bears all around for most everyone except for Annie and Huey, who are still on their date, which probably means it's going really well because a lot has happened, unless this was all supposed to just be happening at the same time. Who knows? It doesn't seem like they've had that many beers, but I don't know how far they've been spacing them out or how much Supes can really hold their liquor. So I don't have a way of truly gauging this, but they're still on this date, and Annie explains that she was holding back in bowling because she had a bad experience as a young woman in trying to date her crush. She said everything was going really great. They were even holding hands, and that her hair looked great and everything was going really well until some other person at the party punched the guy that she had a crush on, and so she beat up the guy who punched him, which kind of emasculated her crush, and her crush never spoke to her again. Huey is really supportive about this in a cute way, though. He cracks jokes about the other guy and assures her that he thinks it's awesome that she can kick his butt at bowling and really everything. She's like, it doesn't bother you that I could bench press you? And he's like, oh, is that a threat or a promise? He's just being really silly, and it is adorable in a way. They seem to be getting along really well and have a similar sense of humor, which is why it's really jarring for him when he seems to see Robin staring at him. So we know that Robin was killed by A-Train, but Huey is seeing what very much appears to be her. She's not translucent in any way, so she does not appear to be a spirit or anything like that, but who knows? We haven't gotten that far into the mythos of this story yet. However, the moment is kind of jarring for him, and while he is kind of sitting there a little bit distracted, he's also just let Annie know she has ketchup on her face, and she says she's going to go to the bathroom and she'll be right back. So when she gets up, she leaves her phone on the table, and Huey seems really upset about this, but he goes ahead and does what Butcher said and pretty much puts the bug on Annie's phone while she is gone to the bathroom so that they can listen in on her phone to whatever she says. We're going to go on another break, and when we come back, we are going to wrap up this episode with The Boys, The Deep, and Homelander. Stay tuned.
The Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast, the show that gives you advice on everything travel. We explore places you've always wanted to go, as well as giving tips for traveling in those places. We'll give you advice on the best sites for travel tips, information, and discounts. Join us as we travel the world, explore cultures, and meet new people. The Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast has got you covered. Download the GSMC Travel Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back. Before the break, we were reviewing how the date is going between Annie and Huey, as well as the search for the missing woman. So we know that MM is upset at this point because Frenchie has gone off mission yet again, and instead of gassing her, has tried to talk her into coming with them. So he starts really lighting into Frenchie about Mallory's grandkids getting tortured to death by Lamplighter, the one who has just stepped down, the soup who stepped down and who Starlight has replaced. And apparently in that scenario, Mallory was their boss and had ordered Frenchie and the others to kill Lamplighter, but Frenchie decided to go off mission and let him go instead because he thought that Lamplighter was perhaps not a bad guy after all, is the impression that you get. But it turns out that Lamplighter was perhaps even worse than we thought, because Lamplighter doesn't torture Frenchie and he doesn't torture Mallory physically, but he tortures Mallory's grandkids to death because he wants retribution for them even having had the audacity to come after him to begin with. But this is very much a sore subject, and Frenchie's like, I didn't know. He's like, you get the sense that he really thought that it was going to be fine, but that's why they were not able to let Translucent go in the last one. But this new woman is not one of the 7. She is powered, but she's not one of the 7. So he feels a different connection to her. So Butcher tries to get them to stop from fighting because they're 1, in a very public place, 2, needing to find this woman, and 3, it's about to escalate into a full-blown fist fight in public, which is gonna sap their energy so that they can't go find them. Butcher doesn't care if they actually beat each other up, but he understands that it won't change the past, and he likens them to the Spice Girls, and he's like, they're not great apart, but they are together. And MM's like, why do you know so much about the Spice Girls? But Butcher just keeps on going with the analogy. So we skip from here to seeing the Deep breaking out a dolphin from Oceanland. He has it in a cargo van, and it's kind of hanging in a harness in the back of a cargo van, and he's spraying it with a kitchen sprayer, more or less, like one of them you get at the dollar store and put water in. And he's just misting, I suppose, this dolphin. And it seems that they may be more than friends, but he is telling the dolphin he doesn't want to have that conversation right now. He wants to get it to the ocean before they have any serious discussions. But unfortunately, along the way, the cops catch up with them and cut their car across in front of them, which forces the Deep to slam on his brakes. And the dolphin goes flying through the windshield, you guys. It's so messed up. Most of the charities that I donate to are animal related, but this scene, they played the Spice Girls in slow-mo in the background, and it is very much played for laughs. So he looks absolutely horrified because since the dolphin is technically just in this sling in the back and is not strapped in any way, it goes flying through the windshield across the street, and you think for a second that it might be okay. And then an 18-wheeler runs it over. And the Deep just looks absolutely horrified. It is very much an out of the frying pan and into the fire type of situation. And there's no telling how he's going to handle the PR from that one either. Not only is his friend / perhaps paramour dead now, but he's now going to have to face the cops as to why he stole this dolphin from Oceanland, which he is also supposed to be the face of for their fall campaign. We jump back to the boys chasing the missing woman to the subway, only for A-Train to catch up with her and start beating the life out of her. Butcher feels that at this point there's nothing that they can do to save her and tells Frenchie to let it go. But Frenchie instead alerts everyone around by saying, look, A-Train's here, A-Train's here, like he's another fan, because remember, they are treated like celebrities. So everyone goes to try to get his autograph, and A-Train has to step aside from the girl to make sure that people don't see that he was beating the crap out of someone, especially a woman. So that would be bad PR. This is, again, the boys appealing to the Soups only caring about their reputations. Frenchie is using that against them again. So they've used it against Popclaw. They've used it against A-Train. And we have also seen that they do truly care about their reputation above all else. Because Madeline Stillwell was also confronted by the marketing guys. Not really confronted. It was an amicable discussion about what to say about Translucent. And the marketing guys proposed even letting the public know that he was dead. And they're like, hey, let's just let people know that he's dead. We'll say that he got killed in some kind of really weird freak accident and it'll all blow over. And Madeline's like, I don't want to admit to the public that some of our Soups who are supposed to be invulnerable were able to be killed. That would be bad PR. So let's just say he's fighting MS-13. That's how they end up deciding that, because the reputation is what gets them all of these goods. It's what gets them these major contracts in all of these different cities. It's what brings in the money, and they don't want to admit this, particularly in light of the bill going before Congress about wanting to put Soups in the military. So they are protecting their reputation above everything else. We saw this happen as well in the last episode with how they were treating Annie following her standing up for someone who was going to be sexually assaulted. They cared more about the PR than anything else. So for Translucent, for Homelander, for Stillwell, all of these things, it's about reputation being above all else. But in this case, Frenchie gets to use it against them to save this woman. So while A-Train is distracted, they run down the subway tunnel after her, and he wants to try to talk to her first. Frenchie tells Butcher, hey, what if she's a Spice Girl? And so Butcher lets him go ahead and step forward, but the woman definitely goes to attack him. Butcher is ready for this though, because he goes ahead and just tosses the gas canister at them and gasses both of them. It's just knockout gas, so he knows that Frenchie will be fine after this, but he just literally ups and gasses his friend, which is also kind of a Jack O'Neill thing to do, I think. I can totally see Jack gassing Daniel as collateral damage from Daniel being in the way. Indeed, Jack almost had to nuke an entire ship with Daniel on it because Daniel was being oppositional about what was going on this planet that was being terraformed by one group while another group was still living on it. There was no great answer for what Jack needed to do at that point. And in this case, it's very similar where Butcher's like, okay, fine, you tried this your way. I'm going to gas you. Your way clearly did not work. So, this does still essentially save Frenchie. And after all, Jack did not have to nuke Daniel. And a happy medium was found in both cases. More or less. The girl isn't dead, but Frenchie is also knocked out right now. So from this point, we see the wreckage of Transoceanic Flight 37 as crime scene personnel collect debris washing up on the beach while Homelander and Queen Maeve look on. And Stillwell is watching this from her office because this is obviously on the news, which is why Homelander and Queen Maeve have been instructed to stand there to begin with. And Homelander is listening to the news anchor as he is giving his report about how 123 people died, and Homelander, just loud enough for the anchor to hear, goes, they didn't have to die. And so the anchor is, of course, like, yes, I get a soundbite, and runs over there. And Homelander says that they arrived 3 minutes after the plane went down because they weren't in the chain of command. And then he appeals to the American people via the news camera to talk to their congressman about letting supes in the military so that a tragedy like this never has to happen again. Stillwell looks incredibly pleased and a bit surprised. He's very clearly off script, and he is turning this tragedy into an opportunity, which is, again, what this episode is about. So Queen Maeve does not look as happy as Stillwell. She looks upset, but she does still have her camera face on. She does almost seem suspicious of Homelander's motives now, though, for leaving the people behind. The actress who plays her does an excellent job in getting a lot across in her facial expressions because Maeve is so reticent. And that look is really where we leave this episode. So episode 4 is largely about tragedy being converted into opportunity, how they put reputation above all else, and how people can be more than one thing, Joel. Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC Sci-Fi Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'd like to ask that you please subscribe to the show, and writing a nice review always really helps us. Also, if you could please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, I'd appreciate it. Thank you kindly, and have a good night.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Sci-Fi Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.